Welcome to Second Wind, the podcast where we uncover the stories, methods, and modalities of women and men who have found their purpose while walking this earth. Sometimes they found their second wind by accident, sometimes by hardship, and sometimes by intent. There is always something to learn from others, and really, isn't finding our own purpose what we are all looking for? I know I am, and that's why I'm hosting this very podcast. My name is Wendy Charles Maguire. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. Hello, Second Wind, and welcome to yet another fabulous episode with another fabulous person. And like always, I find these people or they just come to me, which is cross paths. It's crazy how this happens. And this is how it happened again. And how I met Keyana was I was at a farmer's market in Serenbe in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia. And I saw this sign. It said, Vivians Southern Treats, gluten-free desserts. And I said, well, I could probably try that. And so I walked over to her booth and looked at her things, and she was busy with other customers. And I looked at her, I said, how long have you been doing this? And what did you say, 3 years or something?
Yes, 3 years.
Just about 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I figured you around my age, and I said, oh, I think you have a story. What did you used to do before this? And you kind of, you're like, who is this crazy lady? And I had come fresh off a latte, and it was like a nice Saturday morning. I was free and not working, and I was like, running through the farmer's market. And you looked at me and you looked down like you were, should I answer her? And then you look back up again. I was a lawyer. I said, oh, you've got a story. And you said, yes, I do. I said, oh, we have to talk. And I ran and got my card from my car. And I said, oh, can I call you? I think you'd be perfect on my podcast without even knowing your story. I just felt that from you. And then we had our pre-interview, and it definitely is a great story with lots of things that will resonate with a lot of the listeners. And I'm excited to share your story. So welcome, Keyana Laws, to Second Wind, the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy and honored to be here. Thank you, Wendy.
Well, thank you.
This is
and
great.
You also went and listened to the podcast because you wanted to make sure you even liked it before.
Well, in all fairness, I accepted the invitation before I listened, so maybe I should have done it in reverse, but I would not have changed. Nothing would have changed. It's an amazing podcast. You have great guests, and they have wonderful stories. And I've been learning a lot just listening to them as well. So I'm really happy and honored to be a part of the lineup. Thank you.
You are part of the lineup. I love how you said that. That's perfect. So let's get into the story. There is a woman who was a lawyer for many years who decided to bake gluten-free desserts and then peddle them. How did this happen? What was that thing that changed your trajectory?
So yes, and the desserts vegan and gluten-free. So everything I do is
that's
vegan.
Even better. That's right.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So it's vegan versions of your traditional Southern desserts. And the lineup of desserts includes cobblers, fruit cobblers, and pound cakes, and sweet potato pie, and then it expanded into the gluten-free line because I had a customer who has celiac, and so she was not able to indulge in the treats, and I felt really bad because she had a flare-up. Actually, I hadn't seen her at the farmer's market for a while, and I found out she had a flare-up because of her celiac. And I said, don't buy these regular peach cobblers. I'll make you a gluten-free version. And so that's what started the launch of the gluten-free line.
Okay.
And so now I have gluten-free cobblers, gluten-free cakes, and then I added cookies because we have a lot of young customers, little kids, and I was once one of those little kids. I grew up dairy free, and so I've always cooked and baked dairy free, and so having cookies and having them available for children and kids being able to come up to the table and they said, I can't have dairy or I can't have eggs, and they said, what can I eat? And I said, you can eat anything on the table. This table's for you. And to see the the look on their face when they realize that, it's amazing. It's really why I do what I do, and why, I started the company a couple of years ago. Yeah, so it'll be almost officially 3 years coming up. Probably by the time you air this podcast, it'll be officially 3 years.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So what started that? What started you doing that? I know that it was the health, but what was that moment that said, oh, I think I'm going to bake and quit doing law? Because that's a huge jump. I mean, most people looking at that would be like, what? Like, into the unknown, from a good salary, good position, people knowing your name, to now baking. Could be isolating, I would think.
On one hand, it wasn't easy. On the other hand, it was easier than I thought. Right. So what was the moment? It was a series of moments. There were dominoes. So the first thing that, of course, had the biggest impact on me in my changing trajectory away from law was, of course, losing my mom. And so for people who aren't familiar, who haven't had a chance to meet me at farmers markets or at events, local events, Vivian is the name of the company because that was my mom's name. And so I named the company after her to honor her. And she passed away in 2015, in September 2015. Actually, we did our pre-call. It was a couple of days after the anniversary of her passing. Just coincidentally happened.
Right.
But she passed away, and I was her only child. She was a single mom, and so we were very close, and that had a profound effect on me. Of course, that was in many ways losing my tether. And so in the beginning, it was hard to process, because there was, anyone, unfortunately, who's had the experience of losing a parent knows that in the immediate hereafter, there's a lot of things that have to be done, a lot of preparation that has to be done, and a lot of arrangements that have to be made. And things were more complicated because my mom had an illness, and she was actually staying with me. I lived up in the Northeast in Philadelphia at the time, and it so happened it was the weekend that the Pope was coming to town back in 2015. And so that made things a lot more challenging. And I unfortunately wasn't there when she passed. She was living with me, but I was at work and came home and found her. And so, the first several months were kind of a flurry of activity. And of course, my personality was probably just to bury myself in work, and I did that. And so it took a little while for me to actually process the grief and go through it. And so once I did, it put everything in perspective. It really put in perspective what mattered. The fact that I wasn't there when she passed, that, like I said, that was a big deal for me to work through. But
right, because you had said, Keyana, I was at work preparing for something and I didn't really need to be there.
Right.
And I chose to be there. And the fact that your mom died at that time, you said it really didn't feel so good. You felt guilty.
I did.
I mean, who wouldn't?
I did because the thing that I was there working on, it was one of those things where, and anyone in that kind of corporate setting knows the experience of being pushed to file something on a deadline, but in the reality, the deadline doesn't matter. It's like one of those artificial deadlines. So feeling like you have to get it done and do something. And of course, because of what was happening in the city and having the Pope shut down the city, and we were going to have to work from home, and there are all these kind of this flurry of activity that was going on, and we were just getting pressed to get things done. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. So that was kind of hard to work through, that guilt and those issues. But I think you said it best actually in the pre-interview, right? When you said, maybe that's it. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. I wasn't supposed to be there. And that was
right.
To hear that from you. And so
I've learned a lot in the studying, and I'm going to be talking to hopefully people with near-death experiences and things like that, and about our souls and, the whole purpose, right? That's what it's all about. It's a purpose. And perhaps your mother wasn't going to be able to let go with you there.
Right.
That's what they say. Sometimes people wait, like the whole family will be there in the room and then they'll all go to get something to eat for 5 minutes and that's when they'll die because they didn't want to do
Mm-hmm.
that. It's very interesting how the soul kind of just decides, is from what I'm learning. I'm definitely not an expert, but this is kind of
Right.
the job as well. So I'm glad I could help.
You
Without
did.
knowing it.
You did. You absolutely did.
Okay.
Putting it in that kind of context, framing it in that way was helpful. So I appreciated that. And so after as I was going through that grieving process and recognizing that my job as a lawyer, while it was important and the work I was doing was important, that wasn't it. You know, that wasn't the that should not be the central focus of life. At the end of the day, it's a job, and yes, it was an important job, and I did a lot of good through that job. But at the end of the day, it was a job. You know, what I said to someone was, if I drop dead tomorrow, they're going to have someone in here in my office doing the same job. You know, the next day. And so that really put things in perspective for me, and it helped me separate my identity from being a lawyer, because that's the identity I had for so many years, growing up the way I did, and you know, being able to accomplish that level of professional success. So that was my identity, and being able to sit and kind of think and have that time away and work through the grief process, it helped me to separate my identity, who Keyana was, from being a lawyer. And that helped in so many ways. It really probably helped me become a better lawyer because I didn't take things so personally anymore. You know, I was able to rebound from setbacks on cases a lot easier because I didn't take it personally anymore. It wasn't a reflection on me personally. That's just how it works. And so I had a new perspective on work, and it was through that new perspective on work that when my friend and coworker came to me and said, "I'm leaving," and she was around the same age as I was, maybe a year older, and she's someone who I respected so much as a lawyer, and she said, "No, this isn't for me anymore. You know, there's more to life, and I'm going to go start my own company." And that really resonated with me, because I said, well, if she can leave this job and leave this everything she's worked for over 20 years as a lawyer, then why can't I? And so that probably was the first seed, you know. And at the same time, I was working on a case that was very challenging, and it was a case that had a lot of travel associated with it. And I think I mentioned this during the pre-call, that I spent at the end of 2017 going into 2018, those last 2 quarters, I spent more time in another state than I did at home in Pennsylvania. I was home maybe 3 days a week sometimes. You know, I'd fly out on a Monday or early Tuesday. I'd be out there all week and fly home late on a Friday. And so it was untenable. I just couldn't continue that situation, and the case was a little frustrating, and it kept getting delayed. It was going to trial, and so that was exciting for me because it was my first solo trial, you know, without anyone else. So that was an exciting process, but it kept getting delayed, and it was a little frustrating. And so after it got delayed, I think maybe the second or third time, I just said, you know what, that's it. I need to get out of here. I need to go. And so I said, I'm going on vacation. And I booked the trip and went out to Utah and went to this resort and sat in the desert for about a week and just sat. And you know, there were no TVs.
Sounds
And it was
lovely.
it was no TVs. And so I had time to just journal and hike and relax and eat clean, because I had 6 months of eating on the road, so it's not healthy at all. And so it was a nice chance to go and just eat clean and just kind of get mentally back in a good space mentally, and so and healthy. And so it was through that process, just sitting in the desert journaling, that I said, you know what, I had already gotten to the point where I was going to be walking away from the law. sooner rather than later. And the question was, what next and where?
What next?
And
Mm-hmm.
right. And I started thinking about the people in my life who I had in my life who were important people to me, and realizing those people were in Atlanta. And I said, okay, well, if I'm going to start this new life, that's where I should be. And so that's when I made the decision to relocate to Atlanta. And once I got down here, and like I said, having the freedom again, having that work-life balance again, that was how I was able to rediscover the love of baking and cooking, and start this journey to Vivian Southern Treats. Yeah, so it was just
And you
Mhm.
came to Atlanta as a lawyer,
I
right?
did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
you didn't. It was gradual. You didn't just like, there's things where people are like, oh, I must follow my dream and my passion, and off the cliff they go with no plan B, right? And
Right.
maybe you should have maybe saved some money or paid off your car before you did that or something.
Right.
And you knew you wanted to change, but you were also wise enough
Mm-hmm.
to continue to do what you were doing until you had a plan.
Right.
Well,
Right.
how did you formulate that plan, and how did you know it was baking is the question.
Uh, so I think the baking part came before the plan part. So I knew I was going to transition out into something else. And I was in the geographic space to do it. And anyone who knows Atlanta know that this is a really great place for small businesses to launch. And so if you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, this is a great place to be. And I recognized that. So I was, okay, this might work, for me starting some kind of business here. And so once I got back into baking, and my friend asked me to make the Jamaican rum cake, and I said, okay, well, I made the version for her, and it was dairy free, of course, because that's how I cook and bake. And
yeah,
so
if you're going
then
to go to the party, you told me if I'm going to the party, I want to be able to eat the cake, so I'm going to make it vegan,
right, I'm not going to make it
and that you can't
right,
eat. And you didn't even. Did you
exactly.
tell her it was going to be vegan?
I did. I did. I told her up
Oh,
front,
okay.
and I made it. And I did make a test cake for her. I made a test cake and took it over to her, and she tried it, and she said more rum. I think that was the only feedback. It was more
More
rum.
rum.
Put more rum there.
Okay.
So I made the other one. Made it for the party, and everyone enjoyed it. And so then I said, let me try this again without the egg. Let me see if I can figure this out, how to do it without the egg. And I did, and I tried that, and I liked it, and then gave it to some other people, and they liked it. And so I said, okay, maybe this vegan thing, because at that point it wasn't just, I knew I could do dairy free things, but can I do that next step, which is taking out the egg? And so once
Yeah.
I recognized I could probably figure that out, then I started brainstorming. And again, as I was kind of getting my feet and my bearings in Atlanta, and kind of going around and seeing what wasn't available for me to eat, that's also, it's like, so all these thoughts are kind of merging together at once, and flowing into a plan. And then my friend actually suggested, she said, why don't you take some time off work and just think about it, and experiment a little bit, and do the research and see if this will work, see if you can make this work. And so that's what I did. I took, I think, a month hiatus from work, and worked through that process, and got the first business license, and started putting things in together and putting things on paper, and looking at farmers markets. And that was the end of 20, gosh, that
Even
was the end
19,
of
right?
2019. Yes.
Right
And so
before, like as COVID was starting to
right.
come
Well,
along.
so that's the thing. So the business was officially launched on paper, and was making a few things for friends, and then I decided I wanted to go into the farmers markets. So I officially launched in the farmers markets February 29th, 2020. And then 2 weeks later, like, the
Yeah.
world comes to a ground.
That's right, because it was right before St. Patrick's Day for our restaurants. It was like
Yeah.
what was that? It was like right before St. Patrick's Day. And we'd already spent the 30 grand on everything you need for St. Patrick's Day. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we're gonna keep going, and we'll just see what happens. Yeah,
See what
that was
happened.
crazy.
It was, and it worked out though, because the farmers market where I started, which is down in Peachtree City, it was able to continue to function because it was deemed an essential business. And so it was an opportunity for people to come out to shop in the open air, in the open fresh air, and buy their local produce and their local baked goods and their local juices and meats and things like that. So that was where I started, and we went through COVID and got really positive reception from the desserts. And I started off with just the cobblers and the pound cakes in, I think, lemon and vanilla, and the sweet potato pie. And then, like I said, I met that. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy it. Glad you enjoy it.
Yeah.
It is officially the bestseller. Has been since the business launched. The sweet potato pie. That is the most popular item, hands down.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then working at that market is when I met the customer, and that led into my foray into gluten-free baking. And I had another vendor, actually a co-vendor, who said, Serenbe has this farmer's market, and they don't really have a lot of gluten-free options out there, but a lot of people ask for them, so you might want to look into that. And I did, and that's how I ended up at Serenbe. And so I've been out at Serenbe since 2020 for their market. This was my third season at their market, and then things just grew. And at the end of 2020, going into 2021, I realized that I wanted to do this full time. This was it. This was my second wind, right? This was what I was gonna transition into full time. So I started making the plans to do that and figuring out what I needed to do logistically to make that happen. And I, went to different farmers markets and kind of expanded my reach and my footprint a little bit last year. And then that was what gave me the opportunity to start to pivot into retail and to start selling things through retailers and to retailers and to a couple of restaurants. And so that's where things are now. So that's the next step, is transitioning into retail, because ultimately I want these products to get to as many people as possible. I want the kids who grow up like I grew up to be able to have those kind of options that I didn't have. That's the end goal with the business.
That's your end goal, which is, it's very heartfelt, and it's really cool. And that you told me before we hung up the phone your plans and why, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to find out, you grew up in a kind of interesting time with a single mom, and how you even got into law to begin with. It was a very interesting thing, and you were able to get scholarships. Your mother really pushed you in school, but you also hung out with your godparents and your grandparents. So you were always hanging around, what did you say, 50 and 60-year-olds. So you're super mature. Tell us a little bit about who is Keyana? Who is this person we're talking to?
Okay. So I'm the daughter of a single mother. And back then it was a little less common than it is now. So there were some challenges.
Where'd you grow up? I forgot.
I grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
Maryland, that's right.
Yeah. I grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, small town. And it was, growing up in the 80s, it was one of those towns that was going through that transition of, unfortunately, losing a lot of the factories and those kinds of jobs that people of my mom's generation grew up, and they would, come out of high school and they get a job and they work it for 30 years and retire with a good pension. And so those jobs were going away. So I grew up in that kind of transition. And it's, it's a very blue collar town, very blue collar families where I grew up. But, things could be challenging in terms of finances and financial security. And so I grew up okay. My mom, made sure I never missed any meals, but there were a lot of things that I did go without because other things had to be prioritized. And because she worked a lot, my grandmother, my grandparents were my caregivers for the most part. And if they were tied up, then, my aunts or my uncles, my godparents. So, yes, true product of a village, and so, yeah, I grew up with a bunch of 50 and 60-year-olds, driving around with them and hanging out.
I think 50 and 60-year-olds are very cool personally.
They are. They are. And I advocate for kids growing up in multi-generational families, because it does give you a different perspective when you hang out with your grandparents. I think it definitely matured me a little sooner than my peers. Like I I think I mentioned, growing up and reading things that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise, hanging out with my grandparents and reading the newspaper and stuff like that and watching the news.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really, a lot of people don't do that if they're not in those situations. And just learning different things and hearing different stories about their history and their childhood and how they were raised. And it gives you a different perspective. And so I loved it. I had a ball. Like just the image of me, 6, 7 years old, rolling around with the car full of like 60-year-old ladies, like the Golden Girls, it's like, from an image perspective, looking back, it has to seem pretty hilarious when people saw us. So, but that was growing up.
That's really cool. And how'd you get through school? Was it, you were a really good student? Did you want to be a good student, or were you pushed to be a good student?
Probably a little of both. So, being as the only child and being in this financially insecure position, college is the way out, right? So growing up, I heard you have 3 options. When you get out of high school, it's college or the military or get a job, right? And so for me, it was college. My mom unfortunately couldn't afford to finish college, so she pushed for that and then pushed for me to be a good student. And a lot of that had to do also with her relationship with her mother, my grandmother. And wanting to make sure that our relationship and the things that I had an opportunity to do were things that she didn't have an opportunity to do, and that we had a different relationship.
Isn't that what parents do, though? Isn't that what we want to do? We want to make it easier on our kids, almost to a fault. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely room for backfiring. So it wasn't smooth sailing all the time, that's for sure. But her heart was in the right place, and so she definitely pushed me in school, and for at the end of the day for better. And so I was a good student growing up, and as a result, I had a lot of opportunities when it came time for college, and I was pretty determined, to go to college.
Yeah, but wait, we're going to back up before that. Let me tell you why. Okay. Because not only did you want to be a good student, but you also realized, well, if there's things I want, I have to buy them. And I have to get the money myself. And so your grandmother would drive you to your first job.
Yeah, you remember that.
Yes, I take notes. Yes. Right. And I think, but that's important because your work ethic at such a young age was ginormous. And that has carried you. Right? You see things through, you work really hard, and that's why you're successful. And I think that's missing a lot today. Oh, this doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it. It's kind of like the mindset today. And it's like, no, do your best at what you're doing until you decide to do something different, where you will do your best until the next. But you tell us, how old were you when your grandmother took you to get that first job? And that first job, I mean, you were like the new baby being thrown into the deep end.
Absolutely. I was 16. I was 16. So my mom, she actually didn't want me to get a job. She was, yeah. I mean, growing up, my mom was always took the perspective of school is my job. And so don't worry about different things. I mean, so I didn't really have. I did things around the house, but I wasn't one of those kids that had like assigned chores, like baking or cooking or doing dishes or things like that. I did those things, but I didn't have assigned chores. Her job was, her perspective was, I'll do those things. You just focus on school, focus on your grades. And so that was the entire time of me growing up. And so when it came time when I was old enough to get a job, I wanted a job because I wanted money and I wanted freedom. And at that point, I was 16. I was, I think I was a junior. I was wrapping up my junior year in school, going into my senior year. And, I knew senior year, you have so many expenses and I was going to have to pay for those things. And my mom, she said she was going to help me with a couple of things, but the rest of the things I was going to be on my own. And so And so I got this job. So I had my grandmother take me around to apply to jobs. And I don't think I told my mom. I think we did this behind her.
Okay.
So I got a job working at McDonald's. And so there's McDonald's, of course there's McDonald's in the town, but there was an additional opportunity. They said, well, if you want to work at the beach, right, in Ocean City, Maryland, it would pay more. So what you do is you show up, here at this location every morning, and we'll drive you. We have this van, and we'll drive, the McDonald's school bus, basically, of people down to the beach, and you work there, and we got paid a couple more dollars per hour. So I think it was maybe, I don't know, like $8, $8.50 an hour versus like $6.50 or something that you would make if you stayed in town. Okay. So of course I jumped at it because you get paid, and plus you got paid for being on the bus. So it's an hour each way essentially in traffic, and you're getting paid for that. It's a no-brainer for me, right? Or so I thought. So I get down there the first day, and it was senior week in Ocean City. And anyone who's participated in that knows it's wild. And so all the seniors flock from Delaware and Maryland and maybe even Jersey down there for a week. And it was the busiest location in Ocean City on the beach, that McDonald's where I worked. And the first day I was just running around, and they were trying to train me, but we were slammed with people. And I just remember sitting down at lunch when I finally got a chance to take a lunch break. I think it was probably like 6 hours into my shift. And I just remember sitting there thinking, yeah, I got to go to college. This is not for me. This is it. And so I had a whole different perspective and on motivation at that point. And it was nothing wrong with it. Like it's good, hard, honest work, but it's hard work. And especially when so it gives you that perspective of appreciating hard work and working hard for your money and appreciating the money that you've worked so hard for. And it can put things in perspective to say, okay, this might not be something I want to do for the rest of my life. Maybe I'm not cut out for this kind of manual labor of running around, for 8 hours on this shift. So I was grateful for that opportunity to see that firsthand, and it propelled me to go to college, to do well my senior year, to really focus on getting into college. Because I recognized I wasn't cut out for it. Ironically, now, fast forward all these years later, my job is a lot of physical labor, right? And I enjoy it. So that's the other thing. And I guess working at McDonald's gave me at least the perspective of, I know I can do it. I know I can do all this, be on my feet all these hours in a day and run around the way I have to do for this business. So it gave me that foundation, but it put things in perspective for me. So I appreciate it, and I appreciated the opportunity. And I do definitely advocate young people getting those kind of jobs to kind of put things in perspective and recognize, you don't have to do it forever, but it's a good punch in the mouth, for lack of a better way of describing it. Yeah.
No, and it helps you respect all jobs, no matter what they are.
Yes,
I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No matter where you come from.
Yeah.
So you go off to college. I know your first experience is that the one you said you didn't really feel like you belonged? Is that your first?
Right. So senior year, and you mentioned it. So I was fortunate that because of my academic record and doing some extracurricular activities, I was able to put together a really strong, application packet for schools. And so I ended up going to Towson University, which is in Maryland. And I had, I applied to a couple of different schools. And one I thought I was going to go to, my mom's cousin had gone to. And so we didn't have a lot of people in our family that went to college. I mean, it's like basically one person every generation. So she was a person from her generation, and I was the person from mine. And so she took me on those college visits, and I went to her alma mater, which is down in Virginia. And I went there, and I just, it was a school I thought I wanted to go to, and for years, thought I was going to go down to that school. And I got on campus, and I just wasn't comfortable. And it's a good school, but the kids, there was a big socioeconomic disconnect between where they were and where I was, right? And so I wasn't comfortable. It was a lot of the kids, had that kind of background, and a lot of them, their parents were alumni. Sometimes both parents were alumni, and so along with that comes, a stronger socioeconomic base and foundation than I had, coming from a single mom who didn't finish college. So I just wasn't comfortable there. But when I went to Towson, I got there and I walked around and I talked to a couple of students and I recognized it's like, yeah, this is it. This is the place for me. And so I went there and was fortunate enough to be awarded a full scholarship there. So that took a lot of pressure off in terms of knowing how I was going to pay for college. And then over the years, I was able to become an RA, and so that was a great experience in terms of getting to know other students and working with other people. And then I spent a couple of years in student government, and that was great from a leadership perspective and introduced me to opportunities I wouldn't otherwise have had, like travel. Went on my first plane ride as a result of being in student government to a leadership conference out in California. And so that's how I got through college. I worked a little bit. I did finally, was able to finally buy a car. I think I mentioned that, my mom and also wanting to keep me close wouldn't let me get my license. So that's something I had to get on my own. And of course with a car, she didn't want to co-sign for it, so I had to have my godfather co-sign for it. It's a whole thing. And so, so I got my car and got, and that was, and that's the thing. I mean, with my mom, she, being a single mom, I think it was kind of hard for her to recognize, as much as she wanted me to go away and go to college, I think she, when it got down to it, the cutting of the apron strings was just, it was a challenge for her. And so all of these kind of symbols of independence, applying to colleges, and getting licenses and getting your first car, like those kind of things, she just didn't really encourage at all.
Right, right. Yeah. And there's a little codependency with having you around, for sure. Mm-hmm. And one thing you had told me that I thought was interesting was you went into law because your mother said you loved to argue.
Yes. Yeah. So you asked
me. Did you? Yeah. But why did you choose law? Why?
I think so. There's a couple of things. One, probably financial security, and that was the other thing. When I was young, and I don't know, maybe 6 or so, my mom was in a car accident, and it was pretty serious, but she wasn't hurt. And in going through that challenge of the lawsuit resulting from the car accident.
And we should say she was bringing you to these appointments.
Yeah, yeah.
With the lawyers and the whole accident thing.
Yeah, I was going with her to the lawyer's office, and one day we were leaving, and she said, "You want to make money, be a lawyer." And so, I mean, at that time, I don't think I wasn't interested in being a lawyer. I think back then at that age, I was probably interested in being a teacher, and then I went through a phase where I was interested in computers, and but eventually I circled back to law.
That seed got planted.
It did. And also just recognizing that law meant financial security. I mean, when and I don't think I mentioned this before, but when I was in high school, my last year of high school, there was an internship program, and it paired senior students with these jobs around in the local jobs in the community, so that we could kind of get a feel for things. And at that point, of course, I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I applied for the internship program. I was accepted, and they paired me with a law firm in town. And so I worked for them after school, I think maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And it was, pretty basic stuff. I'd help them with filing, and I'd do some typing, and, I'd walk over to the courthouse and check the mailbox. This is back when they actually had a physical mailbox at the courthouse. You had to go check it, for the court document. Not yet. If people are traveling for the holidays and they want something that they can travel with, if you're flying, I would definitely suggest, picking up some cookies, ordering cookies in advance. Those are pretty easy. to travel with, but some of the other items can be a little challenging, like the cake boxes to get through TSA and what have you. But if you're going on the road, then the whole menu is open to you and would work out.
Okay, so what if people live outside of Georgia? They can or cannot get your delicious items yet.
Not yet. Not shipping outside of Georgia, outside the Atlanta area yet. But if you have relatives in the area who are going to be coming through and traveling to your way for the holidays, they can definitely bring you things. So getting on a plane with desserts, getting through TSA, the easiest things I would say are probably cookies, right? A box of cookies or a pie. But if you're actually going to road trip to your holiday, then the entire menu is up to you, and it's open to you. So the cakes are great things to take. Like I mentioned, my one of my clients is going to get that Jamaican rum cake, the pound of rum cake as I call it. He's going to be sending that with his relatives up to North Carolina. And so those are some of the ways that you can kind of get the products, and we can get them to you. And the goal is to very soon be in the position that things can get shipped. But logistically, it's taking some time because I want to get it right. That's the lawyer in me, right? Wanting to get it right, because I do want when people receive the products that are, once we start shipping nationally, that they are receiving them at the same quality that they left Atlanta, and getting the same quality of product that people can get at the farmers market. So that process is just taking its logistical time, but I want to get it right.
Right. And one of the questions I asked you was like, so what keeps you going every day? And you were a little, And then we both kind of came to the conclusion that you love challenges and you love to try new things. And if it pops into your mind as something you want to do, because you're kind of a spiritual person and believe in the greater energy. And then if something pops into your mind, it might be worth investigating and you're willing to try new things. Would you agree with that?
I would. That's how I've ended up doing a lot of things in life. A lot of my little side hobbies kind of result in me sitting to myself and thinking, I think I'd be good at that. Or I think that's something I want to try. I think I could figure that out. And I go do it. And sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes they're hobbies that I try and I say, okay, I'm going to pivot back to that probably later in life when I have more time to enjoy it. But it was nice for me to try it out these years so I could kind of experience it and say, okay, that's something I want to pursue down the road or not.
Yeah. Man, you've always been willing to try things. Yeah, I'll go get a job. Yeah, I'll try this college. Yeah, I'll be a lawyer. Yeah, I'll do this. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I want to get a motorcycle, so I'll just go get a motorcycle and learn how to ride it. Like things like that. It's really neat. And jumping into this business, you've combined your wanting to help people and be with people, and provide a service that you were lacking, that you wish you had had. And that is a very commendable thing to be doing.
Well, thank you. And for me, growing up in a certain environment where people didn't take a lot of risks, they didn't take a lot of challenges because they really couldn't, right? Because of circumstances and challenges they faced in their own lives. And so I kind of probably grew up looking at that and said, I don't want to be like that when I grow up. I don't want to be afraid of doing things. I don't want to feel like I'm trapped, that I have to keep doing things. And certainly security is important. Don't get me wrong. That's very important. And it's a huge motivating factor. I mean, we all like to eat and have roofs over our heads. But I didn't want to be one of those people that just lives in such fear of doing things. And that you look back at your life and think, well, what if I had done this? What if I had taken that shot? What if I had taken that challenge? What if I had taken that risk? What if I had gone down that path? I just didn't want to live a life of regret when I look back on things. So I think that's also a motivating factor for me as to why I'm so willing to take those leaps.
Love that. Well, gosh, Keyana, thank you so much for your time today and being willing to speak to the crazy lady who bombarded you at your tent and said, you have a story. I'm going to call you and we're going to talk. I appreciate it because you have a lot to offer, and a really neat background, and to go from being a lawyer to a baker, and one that has to figure out recipes minus the normal ingredients. I mean, that in itself, you almost have to be a scientist to do that.
Yes,
and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you and inviting me on. And yes, that's, I guess, another part of the thrill of the job, right? The challenge of taking on those kinds of tasks and being able to create those kinds of treats and those recipes with those kinds of limitations. And it can get interesting. It's a lot of trial and error. It's not easy, but the finished product is worthwhile. And like I said, the looks on faces when people try it, and especially people who haven't had things for a long time. You know, the customers I have who say, well, you know, I went vegan. Yeah, I went vegan, or I went gluten-free, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. I haven't had key lime pie since then. I haven't had a peach cobbler since then. I haven't had peanut butter cookies all those years ago. And so when they try it and they enjoy it, that makes it worthwhile. So thank you so much for the platform and for allowing me to come and speak with you and sharing your energy as well. And I had a really nice time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And until next time, breathe in your second wind. Thank you for listening today. I hope that something you heard made you smile, made you think, and made you feel. If these incredible stories empowered you, awakened you, or left you feeling inspired, make sure to share with a friend and write us a review on iTunes so we can continue to change lives through this content. Make sure you tag us while you're listening on our Facebook group, My Second Wind, or hit the link in the show notes to join the conversation. Until next time, go ahead and breathe in your second wind.